235 hours. That was the longest time a critical care patient had ever waited for a hospital bed in the state of New Mexico. But Zion Bell, a 7-year-old boy, didn't need 235 hours. He only needed 3. 3 hours in the emergency room lobby to die. To die because his insurance didn't have the right letters. To die because his skin didn't have the right color. To die in his father's arms, while a system designed to respond had long ago chosen not to hear. Clarence Bell lived with his 2 sons in a rented duplex at the far end of Maple Street in Santa Flora's south side, where potholes outnumbered mailboxes and the power lines tangled like cobwebs overhead. He drove a delivery van for a grocery chain, rising each morning at 4 a.m., logging close to 120 miles a day just to keep 2 boys fed, schooled, and clothed. Their mother had died when Zion was 3. A traffic accident right in front of the church gates. The report said she crossed the street improperly, but Clarence knew better. There hadn't been a crosswalk on that stretch of South Side in decades. From that day forward, Clarence was father and mother both. He became the man who warmed bottles and checked homework, and the shadow in the hallway who stood guard until his boys were asleep. Zion, the younger, had frequent fevers, always at night. Jaden, the elder, was quiet, studious, the kind of kid teachers like to call reliable. The house was small, but together they had built something sturdier than drywall, trust and tenderness, until that night. 1:48 a.m. Zion's fever spiked. His skin was blazing. Clarence touched his forehead and sprinted to the medicine drawer, but it was too late. Zion's small frame had already begun to shake. The first seizure. There was no car. Their 1998 Camry had broken down weeks earlier. Clarence wrapped Zion in a thin blanket, shook Jaden awake, and tried the neighbors. No one answered. He called 911, but the dispatcher, reading from her script, told him calmly, "Unless it's immediately life-threatening, we recommend transporting the patient yourself." So he wrapped a scarf around his neck, lifted his child, and ran. Jaden followed close behind. The night air in Santa Flora sliced like salt through skin, but Zion burned like a boy on fire. 2:12 a.m. They arrived at St. Agatha Memorial, the hospital whose front gate read, in bold gold lettering, "We hear every heartbeat." The sliding doors parted. Clarence burst through, breathless. "My son, he's seizing. Please, he needs emergency care." Behind the glass, a blonde nurse with a name tag that read, Bethany, looked up, expressionless. Her eyes moved from Zion to Clarence's hoodie, to his shoes, to his skin. Then she looked down and typed. "Fill out the intake," she said. "Take a seat." Right then, another family walked in. White, well-dressed. The mother in cashmere, holding a girl who clutched her stomach. "She's had a stomach ache all evening," the woman said. Bethany smiled and stood. "Follow me. Emergency priority." The hallway door opened, blinking lights guiding them inward, leaving Clarence and Jaden behind. Zion convulsed again in his father's arms. 3:17 a.m. At last, a nurse called for Zion Bell, misspelling the name. Clarence didn't correct her. He couldn't afford to. He stood, lifted Zion, and rushed into the ER. 20 minutes later, a young doctor with a clipboard stepped out, pale as the lab coat on his back. "I'm sorry," he said. "The seizures caused irreversible brain damage. His oxygen levels dropped too long. We did everything we could, but we couldn't save him." Clarence stood there, blank. "But he was alive when I got here," he murmured. "I carried him the whole way. I told you, 2:12. You made him wait more than an hour. What about the girl with the stomachache?" No one answered. They let Clarence see his son one last time. Zion lay still, lips chapped, fingers curled around the corner of the blanket. On his wrist, a hospital ID band. Clarence looked closer. The name was wrong. The insurance code was wrong. Instead of the proper Medicaid tier, it read L1, basic non-urgent, as if this child had never fully existed inside the system. Clarence didn't move. Jaden turned his face to the wall, eyes burning. On the table near the hospital bed, someone had left a note. No name, just one line. "You should check under your son's bed." 3 days after Zion died, the sky over Santa Flora still hung gray. like it had been waiting all morning to rain, but forgot how. Clarence sat at the same kitchen table where he used to eat eggs and cheap toast with his boys, the old vinyl peeling at the edges, and turned through the hospital paperwork for the 50th time. Like if he looked hard enough, he might find an apology buried between the sterile numbers. There wasn't one, just cold facts. Check-in time, body temperature, seizure duration, time of death. There was no line that said Zion had waited in the lobby while others passed him. No footnote about the white girl who came after, but was seen first. No admission of fault. No acknowledgement of mistake. Clarence gripped the stack of papers tighter, then stood. He buttoned up a white dress shirt, the nicest one he owned. He'd saved it for Jaden's future wedding, though that day hadn't come. He wore it now to the county courthouse. The building was concrete, painted a tired kind of gray. The civil claims office sat past security, down a corridor humming with lawyers in their Bluetooth headsets, voices clipped and rushed like they had somewhere more important to be. At the service window, a middle-aged woman took the folder without looking up. She had unnaturally black hair and thin glasses. Name? Clarence Bell. I'm filing a complaint against Saint. Agatha Memorial. My son. He passed because of their delay. She froze for half a second, then lifted her eyes. There was hesitation in her gaze, quickly replaced with practiced formality. I'm sorry, Mr. Bell, but there's insufficient basis to open a criminal case. The listed cause of death was medical complications. No evidence of gross negligence or intent. Clarence took a step back. But I have proof. A hospital ban with the wrong name. Witnesses. You're free to file a grievance with the State Department of Health, she cut in, sliding the folder back like it was a rejected loan application. Clarence didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just nodded, took the file, and left. His footsteps down the courthouse stairwell were the quietest sound in the building, barely audible beneath the hum of central air. The phones ringing, and the automated doors shushing open and close behind people who still had the right to be heard. In the days that followed, Clarence knocked on doors. News stations, journalists, city reps, advocacy groups, civil rights organizations. No one called back. A few replied politely and passed. One editor from the state's largest paper told him, I'm sorry, Mr. Bell, but we're focused on the mayoral race this quarter. And, well, your story might not have enough traction for the front page. Silence, everywhere, as if some invisible hand had sent the word down. Let this one die quietly. That night, Clarence came home. Jaden had already gone to bed. On the table, his son had left a plate of cold rice, saved for his father. Clarence sat down, elbows on the table, and stared at the empty seat across from him. Zion's seat, smaller than the others, with a cushion behind the backrest because the boy's posture always slouched. The room felt heavier than it had in days, like a ceiling full of unspoken questions was about to give way. Clarence rose and walked into Zion's room. The lamp, shaped like a baby giraffe, still cast a warm yellow glow. His pajamas still hung behind the door. A half-finished drawing sat on the desk. The stuffed bear he used to sleep with rested on the pillow like it hadn't moved, just waited. Clarence sat down on the edge of the bed, ran his hand across the folds in the blanket. Then something beneath shifted. He reached under the mattress and touched something solid, cool, wooden. He pulled out a small pine box, old and slightly worn, the lid marked in pencil. ZB, mission to help Daddy. Inside weren't toys or savings or treasures, just pieces of paper, lined notebook sheets, some ripped, all creased, covered in messy pencil scrawl. Letters, Zion's letters. Ones he'd written but never gave to anyone. Daddy, I'll take your temperature tomorrow. You were coughing tonight. You look tired. I want to be a doctor, but not like the one from last week. I want to be the kind who listens to people. If I have a hospital, I'll let poor people in first. Daddy will be my first patient. Some notes were scribbled over. Some had doodles, little hearts and stars. Some were scratched out and rewritten, like the boy had been trying to find the right words to make sure his father would understand. And one letter, folded into quarters, buried at the bottom, made Clarence's knees buckle. If I die before you, please don't be sad. I just want you to be healed. When I get to heaven, I'll tell God, my dad deserves help. Clarence hadn't cried since the funeral, not once. But there in that room, surrounded by the remnants of a boy who had written his dreams in pencil and folded them into a wooden box, the father collapsed onto the floor. He wrapped his arms around the box and wept, not loud, but deep, the kind of grief that cracks through your ribs in silence. The kind of cry you don't make because your child has died, but because the world looked at him and acted like he never lived. Zion's room was left untouched. Everything stayed just as he'd known it. The lamp by the bed, the drawings on the wall, the toy bear resting where it always had. The wooden box, now sacred in its own right, had been placed carefully into the bottom drawer of Clarence's nightstand, wrapped in the softest towel he owned, not to hide but to protect. Because there was something in that box, in those crooked pencil marks from a 7-year-old hand, that made Clarence believe if he kept it safe, then maybe someday someone brave enough might finally choose to listen. He had sent the file to the courthouse, sent it to the press, sent it to the state health board. Every response was the same: a cold stamp, a closed door, like the silence had been oiled in advance to seal without a sound. One night after Jaden had gone to bed, Clarence sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the rejected complaint for what must have been the 10th time. On the last page, the red ink still bled. Insufficient basis for criminal investigation. This time, instead of crumpling it up like he usually did, he picked up a pen and wrote one more line. If anyone still believes justice isn't just for the wealthy, please read this file. Then he signed his name, added his phone number and home address, and paperclipped a photo of Zion's hospital bracelet, the one with the misspelled name. He mailed it off with no illusions. Not with hope, just because he didn't want to die unheard. And then she came, on a Thursday morning without sun, but just quiet enough to begin something. She didn't arrive in a government car, didn't wear a suit with campaign pins or bring a media crew trailing behind her. She was just a black woman, slight, neat bun, calm hands, stepping out of an old sedan with the kind of eyes that had seen this kind of grief more times than anyone should. Jasmine Crockett didn't come to lecture about justice. She came to listen. And sometimes when the world has gone too long without listening, one person's silence at the right moment can save what memory alone could not. Clarence stood on the porch as she approached. He'd seen others come before: reporters, advocates, well-meaning strangers, people who said kind things on camera, touched his shoulder and disappeared when the lights turned off. But Jasmine's gaze was different. She didn't rush. She didn't speak much. She simply looked at him, stepped forward, and laid her hand gently atop the wooden box. Not like someone examining evidence, but like someone who recognized a living memory. "May I see the hospital file?" she asked. Clarence handed her what he had, the same paperwork the court had rejected. But Jasmine didn't stop there. She opened her laptop on the worn living room table, and over the next few hours she sent emails, made calls, and referenced federal code after federal code about a family's right to access their loved one's records. She never raised her voice, but her determination filled the room like a second heartbeat. By late afternoon, she had it, the original digital record from St. Agatha's internal system. Sitting on the couch, lit by the pale glow of her laptop, her silhouette cast against the wall, like someone searching for a voice that had been buried just beyond reach. Focused, silent, unmoving. "Did you know," she said quietly, eyes never leaving the screen, "that Zion's file had a line that was deleted?" Clarence turned, startled. "Deleted?" She rotated the screen toward him. In the cached version of the record, a faint gray line reappeared. Non-priority, Medicaid L1, low tier, non-urgent. "This line wasn't in the hard copy," she said, "and it shouldn't exist in any chart. It's an internal code, a classification flag based on insurance. It means your son was labeled as not worth prioritizing." Clarence looked down, hands trembling. Jaden, standing in the doorway, clenched his fist so tightly his knuckles went white. "And the worst part?" Jasmine's voice softened. "All of the redacted case files from this hospital, every single one, was flagged with the same internal memo. The directive came from Judge Laurel Henderson." Clarence raised his head, I know that name. She's the one who fast-tracked every case in my neighborhood. Always said the hospital followed protocol. She's known for her speed, Jasmine replied, and for keeping St. Agatha's image clean. Her tone wasn't bitter, just factual, like a blade set gently on a table. Cold, precise, inevitable. But she didn't stop with Zion. Jasmine began reopening every emergency room fatality in the past year. She found 9 cases like his, patients of color from the South Side with low-tier Medicaid who died after being made to wait too long. Some had incorrect names, others had mismatched insurance codes. None had ever been investigated. She printed the names, the photos, the notes. She mounted them onto a temporary whiteboard, propped up against Clarence's living room wall, a wall that used to hold family portraits. Now it was a shrine of forgotten truth. Each slip of paper, each pixelated photo, each scribbled chart was a fragment of a body long buried by bureaucracy, stitched back together with quiet resistance. Then one windy night, as Jasmine was pinning up the 10th name, the door creaked open. An elderly woman stepped inside. She wore a sand-colored sweater. Her hands trembled with age, but her eyes, sharp, defiant, belonged to someone who had lived through fire. She walked slowly toward the wall, stared at it. Then she pointed to a faded photo. "That's my daughter," she said. "She was a nurse. She collapsed after her shift. They ignored her cries for help." No one answered. She stood in silence for a long breath. Then, with the weight of a century of indignity behind her, she raised her palm and slammed it flat against the wall. "We don't die because we're poor," she said, her voice cutting like torn wind. "We die because they decided we aren't worth saving." No one silenced her. No one looked away. Clarence gently removed the photo of her daughter and placed it into her hands. Jaden stood nearby, tears finally breaching his quiet resolve. Jasmine didn't film it, didn't post it. She simply took out a red pen, circled the name on the wall, bold, deliberate, just like she had for Zion, because that girl deserved to be remembered, and now she was. That evening, the wind picked up over Santa Flor. It slipped through the rows of low houses in the South Side, sending dry leaves spinning across wooden porches and brushing against the windows like the cautious footsteps of a past returning to be heard. Inside the small house on Maple Street, Jasmine sat on the living room floor with Clarence and Jaden beneath the soft glow of a chipped table lamp. Between them sat Zion's wooden box, like a tiny flame. Not bright enough to light the room, but warm enough to hold 3 people together who weren't bound by blood, yet seemed to know each other from another lifetime. "Would it be okay if I read one?" Jasmine asked, fingertips gently resting on the edge of a folded letter inside the box. Clarence nodded. "Go ahead. He wrote a lot. Some of them I've never had the courage to open." Jasmine unfolded the letter with care, as though she were cradling a piece of a child's soul, still fragile, still whispering. "Daddy, you coughed a lot today. I know you can't afford cough medicine. I have $1. You can use it if you need." She paused for a moment, eyes softening, then reached for another page. "If I die, please don't be sad. Don't be mad anymore. I already forgave you." Her voice faltered, not from tears, but from the way the words seemed to carve themselves directly into her chest. "This little boy," she whispered, "already knew how to forgive a world that didn't even know it was wrong." Jaden, who'd been quiet in the corner, spoke up for the first time. "Do you think if someone else read these, like someone who wasn't family, would they really understand? Or would they just think it's sad and move on?" Jasmine turned to him. Her gaze didn't preach or promise, it simply acknowledged. "They'll understand," she said, "because sometimes one child's letter is enough to rattle an entire system that forgot how to feel." Jaden didn't respond. He simply lowered his eyes, opened his phone, and quietly took a photo of one of the letters. Then, fingers hovering over the screen, he opened a social media app, paused, as if weighing the weight of silence against the risk of being heard, and finally typed, "My little brother used to write letters to the future. He didn't live long enough to send them, so today I'll send one for him." Attached was the handwritten letter from Zion, the one that read, "If I had a hospital, I'd let the poor people in first. Daddy would be the first one I help." By morning, the post spread like brush fire catching wind. First, Jaden's friends shared it, then one of Zion's former teachers, then Black medical advocacy groups. Then an independent journalist from the neighboring state wrote an op-ed titled, "The Letter Never Sent, and a System That Refused to Receive." Within 48 hours, the story reached trending status. People didn't just share. They replied with their own stories of fathers, mothers, children lost, not because of disease, but because they were told to wait, because they had the wrong insurance, because someone decided their pain wasn't urgent enough to matter. That night, as Jasmine checked her inbox, a new message appeared without fanfare. From unknown subject, "If you really want the truth, listen to this." Attachment, audio 1214.mp3. She plugged in her headphones. Static crackled briefly before a man's tired, gruff voice came through. "Yeah, I know. Those kids weren't on the critical list. Medicaid tier's too low. The insurance pool doesn't cover enough to justify an ICU bed. Just stick to protocol. It's always worked. Those South Side folks never win lawsuits anyway." A second voice followed, skeptical. "So we're just going to let the kids sit there and wait?" And the first voice laughed, sharp, callous. "Wait, don't wait. What's the difference? Once he's dead, that's one less case to process." Jasmine pulled out her earbuds, face still. Outside, the wind tugged gently at the curtains, like it too had heard something that refused to be ignored. Somewhere deep in her chest, a voice stirred. Not the voice of a lawyer, but the voice of a daughter who remembered her own mother walking 6 miles for a prenatal checkup and dying before an ultrasound could be scheduled. She looked at the wooden box. Then she looked at the comment section beneath Jaden's post. Thousands of voices rising like a choir. "We've been waiting for someone to speak. Zion spoke for my son. I've never been taken to emergency on time either." Jasmine closed her eyes, and in the dark quiet of that small room, she saw it, a future beginning to grow from the hand of a child who never got to grow up. A handful of words written in pencil, shaking a machine no one had dared to name aloud. Sometimes pain doesn't need to scream to be heard. It only needs to stand up, quietly, and take a single step into the light, and that's enough to make even the most untouchable systems flinch. After Jaden's post and the leaked recording, a wave of outrage swept through Santa Flor, not because someone orchestrated it, but because enough hearts were moved in the same direction. And when drops of grief begin to flow together, they become a current. Jasmine knew then she was no longer alone. She began reviewing every unexplained death swept quietly off the books. Cases marked non-critical, patients tagged with low-tier insurance, those from low-yield districts. In less than a week, she connected with 17 families, each a tragedy on its own, but together they painted a map of systemized indifference disguised in bureaucratic neutrality. A mother who lost her baby minutes after delivery because no one let her into the clean delivery ward. An elderly man whose wife died of a stroke after waiting 3 hours for an ambulance. All of them had once remained silent, out of fear, fatigue, or a quiet belief that their pain didn't count. But this time, they had Jasmine. And more importantly, they had each other. They filed a class action complaint with the Santa Flor County Court, titled plainly but devastatingly, Bell et al. Versus St. Agatha Memorial Hospital, for violation of the right to life and systemic discrimination in medical access. Attached was a list of the deceased, not printed in capital letters like headstones, but handwritten by grieving relatives, each name like a wound etched in ink. But the system didn't buckle. The press was gagged. No station aired the lawsuit. Journalists who had once contacted Jasmine went silent. One finally texted her, "I'm sorry, they won't let me run it." People began to realize St. Agatha wasn't just a hospital. It was a financial pillar of the entire region, from the largest church, to school scholarships, to local diners, even the mayor's campaign office. Every Thanksgiving turkey, every church fundraiser bore its name like a halo. To challenge it was to pull the thread that held too many pockets together, and the hospital fought back. They hired Ernest Drake, a former district attorney known for quiet settlements. Silver-haired, silver-tongued, he smiled like every truth could be massaged if you just worded it right. He had once defended an oil company accused of poisoning a water supply in East Texas. a case that ended with a sealed payout and a sealed record. The court refused to hold a public trial. The judge cited community unrest as the reason. The complaint was rerouted to administrative arbitration. No open hearing, no public record, no testimony. Just a cold table between grieving families and a hospital willing to contribute to funeral costs. Jasmine gave a small, humorless laugh, not of surrender, but of recognition. "Then we'll hold court where they can't censor us," she told Clarence, "in front of the people who matter most." 3 days later, they gathered in the Southside Church, the same place where Clarence once stood beside his late wife and said vows. No judge, no jury, just truth and people. Jasmine didn't take the pulpit. She sat in a circle, at eye level with the crowd. At the center altar, where the Bible usually rested, stood a framed portrait of Zion, enlarged, placed gently on an easel. He wasn't smiling, wasn't crying. He simply looked ahead, straight into the room, like he was still waiting for someone to call his name. Beneath the photo, taped with old masking tape, was a handwritten note. He just wanted to wait his turn like everybody else. A frail woman rose first, hands trembling, holding a photo of her daughter. She died in the hallway. 4 hours. A nurse told me later. They had to prioritize patients with premium insurance. Another man, graying at the temples, stepped forward. He held a letter stained with tears. "If I die tomorrow," his son had written, "don't apologize to anyone. You brought me on time." Clarence didn't speak. He stood behind Jasmine, fists clenched, eyes locked on his son's photo, as if trying to meet Zion's gaze one last time. A gaze that asked no questions, offered no blame, only this: "Why haven't they called me in yet?" The community hearing closed in candlelight, but its echo didn't fade. No hymns were sung, no chants shouted, and yet for the first time, many hands found one another, not to pray, but to stand united. The next morning, Jaden sat at his small desk by the window, the sunlight dull and slow to warm the south side. In his hand was an old USB drive, no label, no casing, just a slip of masking tape across it, scribbled in fading ink. "Don't let this get buried like the rest." He plugged it into his laptop. A single Excel file appeared. No password, no logo, just rows and rows of quietly explosive information. The title read, "Saint. Agatha, Grant Receipts and Supplemental Funding. Streams, Fiscal Year 2023. As he scrolled, Jaden's breath caught in his throat. Recipient, Clara Grace Foundation. Founder, Mrs. Helen Henderson, wife of Judge Laurel Henderson. Line item, Internal Records Oversight Program, St. Agatha Memorial Hospital, $1.25 million US. He called Jasmine immediately. She arrived quietly, sat down, and stared at the spreadsheet like she'd just unearthed a treasure map. Only this one didn't lead to riches, but to buried complicity. She read every line, not as numbers, but as names denied, voices muffled, lives trimmed to fit margins. "So this is it," Clarence finally said, voice like thunder, swallowed in stone. "They're the ones judging, funding, and profiting from the silence." Jasmine nodded slowly. She didn't look surprised. She had seen this structure before. A loop of power so polished it gleamed with respectability. Legal robes cleaned with charity dollars. Death sentences dressed as medical triage. And language so sterile no one could smell the rot of injustice beneath it. The deeper they dug into the spreadsheet, the clearer the web became. A shadow network where every dollar from the foundation circled back to the very decision-makers who buried the evidence. Budget lines for internal audits, record-keeping maintenance, and staff training seminars all traced back to the same council, the St. Agatha Legal Advisory Board, where Mrs. Henderson served as honorary chair. Later that afternoon, Jasmine received a call. No caller ID, no introduction. "Ms. Crockett?" A man's voice, measured, with the smooth texture of power long held. "We advise you take a step back from your current legal activity. No one wants to see a promising career ruined over emotional momentum. You understand, don't you?" "Who is this?" "Someone who's helped a lot of people recognize where the lines are. before they step over. The call cut off. It didn't need threats. The message was clear. Someone was watching, and Jasmine was now standing at a crossroads: retreat quietly or be erased professionally. That evening, she sat alone in the back pew of a small church at the end of South Maple. No reporters, no flashing cameras, just a worn wooden cross, a few crooked pews, and Zion's photo still taped to the altar, its edges curling, ink fading, but his gaze unchanged. She laid the file folder beside her, hands trembling just enough to betray the weight of what she carried. Jasmine had turned down plenty of cases in her career, some lacking substance, some full of noise but no fire. But this wasn't a case. This was a dream suffocated in its sleep, born from a community too used to waiting for their turn and never hearing their name called. As she stepped out into the night, Jaden walked her to the sidewalk. "I'm scared," he admitted, eyes fixed on the ground. "But if you stop now, they win." He looked up. "But if you keep going, at least it means Zion didn't die for nothing." That night, Jasmine returned home, opened her laptop, and typed an email to the State Bar Association. Subject: regarding recent warnings tied to the St. Agatha lawsuit, I'm choosing to continue. The body contained only one sentence: "I didn't go into law to keep my license. I went into law to keep justice alive." She clicked send. No trumpet sounded, no cameras flashed, but somewhere in the quiet dark of Santa Flor, a child who had once been forgotten was smiling, because someone had chosen to stand up. Not for the spotlight, but because he deserved to be heard. Santa Flor County Courthouse, Monday, 8 a.m. The main hall was packed, not because everyone was curious about the hospital lawsuit, but because for the first time in the region's history, a death caused by delayed emergency care hadn't been quietly closed with a line that read, "Insufficient grounds for investigation." On one side sat the light blue shirts of St. Agatha's medical staff, their badges neatly aligned, expressions unreadable. Across the aisle were familiar faces from the community hearing, now holding framed portraits of loved ones or printouts of handwritten letters folded too many times. Jaden sat near the back in a crisp white shirt, fist clenched in his lap. Clarence was in the front row, his back straight, his face composed, sorrow beneath steel. Jasmine entered right on time. No entourage, no legal team. Just a folder, a USB drive, and a hospital ID bracelet wrapped gently in a soft cloth. Ernest Drake, the hospital's counsel, began his defense with that practiced smile. Smooth, rehearsed, the kind that had swayed juries from Texas to Georgia. "Your Honor, this man, Mr. Clarence Bell, is a grieving father. No one questions that. But does grief automatically justify action? I respectfully suggest that this lawsuit is less about justice and more about emotional leverage, a tactic designed to draw tears and point fingers at those who were simply following procedure." He turned toward Clarence. "Mr. Bell, can you honestly say you're not using your son's death to push a personal crusade?" The room went still. Clarence didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes locked with Drake's. Not shouting, not pleading, just holding. A father's gaze that said, "I don't need to explain myself to grieve my own child." Drake pressed on, now dipping into his favorite register. Calm disdain wrapped in the language of order. St. Agatha operates under a standard protocol. Patients are triaged based on medical urgency, not race. The order of treatment is determined by the severity of the case. Just because someone enters after another doesn't imply discrimination. It's the system. He paused dramatically at the last word. A few staff members nodded in quiet agreement. Jasmine stood. She didn't launch into a monologue, didn't present charts, didn't quote legislation. She simply plugged the USB into the courtroom projector. "Please direct your attention to this video," she said. "Footage from camera 3 at the ER intake, St. Agatha Memorial. Timestamp, May 17th, 2:13 a.m. The screen flickered on. No one breathed. A white family entered, the mother holding her daughter. A nurse stepped forward, smiled, and ushered them directly into emergency care. Moments later, a black man arrived, wrinkled shirt, breath ragged, clutching a convulsing child to his chest. He pleaded with the nurse. She glanced up, gave him a quick once-over, and gestured toward the waiting area. End of video. Jasmine didn't retrieve the USB. She didn't return to her seat. Instead, she walked calmly toward Clarence, reached into her cloth bundle, and took out Zion's hospital bracelet, the one he had worn before dying. She stepped to the center of the courtroom and raised the bracelet in her hand. "This," she said, voice clear but steady, "is the system you're defending." She rotated the bracelet so everyone could see. Zion Bell, misspelled as Zion Bell. Code L1, non-urgent Medicaid. Wrong name, wrong code, wrong priority, dead because of it. "His son didn't die of illness," she continued. "His son died because he was placed in the order of care that your system designed." She turned toward the jury box now, her tone unwavering. "Mr. Drake calls this a system, so I ask, what kind of system makes a child wait to die because his father couldn't afford better insurance? What kind of system spells a dying child's name wrong and never corrects it? What kind of system weighs a life against budget lines and coverage tiers?" She lifted the bracelet higher. "And if this really is the system you choose to protect, then it doesn't need reform. It needs to be dismantled. Screw by screw, dot by dot, signature by signature." No one moved when Jasmine lowered her hand. The hospital bracelet still caught the light between her fingers like a quiet wedding band, glinting between justice and betrayal in a long-failed marriage between ethics and the system. The courtroom remained silent. No words, no gavel, not even a clear breath. And yet something in the air had shifted, imperceptible to the eye, undeniable to the heart. A fracture had begun. The jury, 9 individuals of mixed races, most of them lifelong residents of Santa Flor, didn't glance once at Ernest Drake. One middle-aged man, sun-browned and weathered, lifted his hand to cover his face. A Latina woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. The youngest juror, cornrow braids barely hiding borrowed nerves beneath a borrowed suit, bowed his head and quietly wept. At the bench sat Judge Cormac Wiley, long criticized as non-committal by the public. For the first time during the proceedings, he removed his glasses and leaned back in his chair, the room holding its breath as he sat in wordless stillness for nearly a minute. Then he spoke. "This court will not issue a verdict today. However, I do make the following ruling. A full investigation is to be opened into the emergency intake procedures at St. Agatha Memorial. Effective immediately, the hospital's operations are suspended for a period of 3 months to allow for independent audit and inspection." No applause followed, but somewhere near the back, a woman who had lost her husband waiting for an ER bed let out a single sob. No one shushed her, because that sound, that choked, half-breathed release, wasn't a disruption. It was a declaration. The sound of someone who had waited far too long to hear 3 simple words, "I believe you." Across the aisle, Ernest Drake's face twitched. He turned subtly, stealing a glance at Marla Wynne, St. Agatha's CEO, seated on the witness bench. Marla smiled, but the corners of her mouth trembled like faulty wiring in a dying light fixture. She knew, and so did Drake. The seat they had once claimed with such confidence was now beginning to burn from beneath. The news broke faster than any injunction could contain it. Though the court hadn't allowed live coverage, within hours independent reporters pieced the hearing together, through photos, eyewitness accounts, and a leaked video clip filmed quietly from the gallery. The first article hit the internet under the headline, "The Bracelet That Didn't Blink," and the day justice finally turned around. By late afternoon, Judge Laurel Henderson announced her retirement for personal reasons. The statement came through a clerk's office memo. No press conference, no farewell remarks. But no one was naive enough to believe it was voluntary. A leaked internal memo posted by a former legal aide revealed she had signed 4 strategic consulting contracts with the Clara Grace Foundation, run by her own wife. That same foundation had funneled funds directly into St. Agatha's internal audit division. And in one attached email, sent to Marla Wynne over a year prior, Henderson had written, "I'll keep the hospital's image clean, but you know I don't work for free." Shortly after, the district attorney's office launched a separate investigation, this time with Ernest Drake as the primary subject. The opening charge, suppression of evidence that could have altered emergency response outcomes. An anonymous former nurse stepped forward, testifying that Drake had instructed staff to delete backup security footage before Zion Bell's case became public. It was only because Jasmine had a duplicate, quietly recovered from an old server by a former IT technician, that the truth survived it all. Outside the courthouse, a makeshift press gaggle formed. A young reporter, clearly new to the circuit, managed to get close to Drake as he exited through a side door. "Mr. Drake," she asked, microphone trembling in her grip, "do you have anything to say to the Bell family or to the others?" Drake paused. He didn't look up. He didn't face the cameras. He just muttered, low enough for the mic to catch, "I was just following protocol." The same line he'd used in court. But this time, no one believed him. No one forgave him. No one even cared to hear it. Clarence and Jaden walked out of the building side by side. No spotlight followed them. But outside the gates, dozens of Southside residents stood waiting. No banners, no chants, just presence, still and silent. One by one, they nodded to Clarence. Each gesture an unspoken vow. "We saw it, and we remember your son's name." Jasmine came out last, her hand still holding the cloth that cradled the hospital bracelet. A young journalist approached, hesitating. "Ms. Crockett, do you consider this a victory?" Jasmine stopped, turned back. "No," she said. "This was just one day the system lowered its head for a child who was never even called by his right name." She looked the reporter in the eye. "If that's victory, then we lost a long time ago." Santa Flor was shifting seasons again, but this time the wind didn't carry the red dust that clung to every windowsill in Southside. It brought the scent of first rain, mingled with new-cut wood, the smell of a beginning that didn't promise greatness, but offered something far more precious: warmth, like a hand resting gently on your shoulder after years of walking with your head down. Jasmine returned to the house at the end of Maple Street on an afternoon like that. The sun was mild, the clouds loose and quiet, and even the weight in the air felt lighter than before. The door opened. Jaden greeted her with a rare smile, small but genuine. "Come in," he said softly. "Dad's been fixing up Zion's room." The small bedroom had been gently transformed. The walls were now painted a calming blue. A new curtain with printed stars hung across the window. The old bed had been replaced, the sheets and pillows neatly folded, and by the headboard stood a little desk. Empty, but positioned so the morning sun could reach it just long enough to warm an open book. Jasmine stepped inside and looked around. She didn't speak. She simply stood still, as if listening to memories carry on their conversations through the soft hum of wind brushing across the floorboards. Jaden walked over, holding a large sheet of paper in both hands. I redesigned the hospital," he said, unsure of how it might sound now that someone was truly listening. Jasmine took the page. Drawn in colored pencil was a building with no gates, no priority zone signs, no insurance-based categories. Instead, there was a large digital clock above the waiting area. Below it, in bold letters, "Right turn, right name, right time." "I want, if someone ever has to wait in pain," Jaden said quietly, still looking at the drawing, "at least they won't have to wait in silence." In the corner of the room, Clarence knelt beside the bed. His hands reached under, toward the place where Zion's wooden box used to rest. He pulled it out, now sanded, polished, the lid rimmed with a soft silver trim. He opened it and checked the old letters. None were missing. None had been reshuffled. They all lay as they had been, like the soul of a child who never needed to grow up to be remembered by his true name. Then Clarence added a new envelope. It was cream-colored, handwritten in careful, steady strokes. He didn't seal it. He simply folded it and placed it gently on top of the others, like adding a soft harmony to the quiet choir of memory. "To my son, if you were still here, you'd probably tell me not to write something like this. You hated making me cry. But today I'm not crying. Not because it stopped hurting, but because I've learned how to keep you with me, not in tears, but in change. You were the bell that woke this town. Every word you wrote, every dream you never got the chance to speak out loud. They've rattled doors we all thought were sealed forever. People are looking at each other differently now. They're starting to listen, starting to remember. I don't know if justice will ever be big enough to bring you back, but I know that because of you, it's learning how to hear the heartbeat of the poor. This bed won't stay empty. This desk won't stay quiet. Someone else, a child like you, will sit here someday and write the dreams you couldn't finish. And this time, I know, they won't get his name wrong. Your dad, Clarence, slid the wooden box back under the new bed, slowly with care, like he was laying the first stone of a memorial no one could see. Not built from marble or bronze, but made of memory, protected by truth. Jasmine turned away, not because she was overwhelmed, but because there are moments that belong solely to a father and a son he can no longer hold, but still keeps in the only way left, with faith. No one really knew who first had the idea. It might have been a teacher who once taught Zion, or maybe the old carpenter who lived next to Southside Church. The kind of man who had seen too many funerals pass quietly by without anyone daring to call them a ceremony. All anyone knew was that on a quiet Sunday morning, just outside the church steps, a small wooden sign appeared. No fanfare, no ribbon cutting, no speeches. It simply stood there, silent and sure, with a hand-painted line in white. Zion Memorial Station, where the silenced prayers are now heard. It wasn't a monument. It wasn't sacred. It was simply a place for anyone who had ever waited or lost or stayed silent to come, sit, leave a prayer, or maybe just listen to the sound of their own breath again. That same day, after weeks of hesitation, Jaden shared his brother's final letter on social media. The caption was short. He didn't live long enough to become a doctor, but he healed people the system said weren't worth hurting for. This is the last letter he left behind. The post included a photo of Zion's hospital bracelet, misspelled name, wrong insurance code, placed beside a yellowed scrap of notebook paper in a child's handwriting. Daddy is the first person I want to help. No one planned what happened next. No campaign, no trending hashtag, and yet in just 3 days the post surpassed 3 million shares. Not because it was eloquent, but because it said something everyone had once felt, once swallowed, once tried to name but never could. That ache of being left behind, while waiting, while hurting, while calling out. Jaden's inbox filled by the hour. A mother from Missouri wrote, "I lost my son because the hospital didn't believe me when I said he couldn't breathe. I've lived in silence for a year, but thanks to your brother, I know I'm not alone." A retired nurse from Georgia messaged, "They reassigned me for trying to treat a patient who wasn't on the priority list. Thank you for speaking when I couldn't." And a 10-year-old girl in Oakland left a comment, "I want to be a doctor, but not the kind that decides who gets to live. I want to be like Zion dreamed." One late afternoon, Jasmine returned to Clarence's house. It wasn't a remarkable visit. She simply sat on the porch steps, sipping tea from a chipped ceramic mug, listening to the faint sound of kids playing ball down the street. "Someone asked me," Clarence said, his voice as light as the breeze, "if I ever forgave the people who let my son die." Jasmine didn't answer. "I told them this," he continued. "I don't forgive. I don't hate either. I just try to keep his dream alive a little longer than he lived." Jaden had returned to school by then. He didn't post every day anymore. But tucked inside his desk drawer, he still kept his drawing of the new hospital, with waiting chairs that had no names, only numbers drawn evenly across the page. On the front door, he'd taped a small sign in his own handwriting. "Here, everyone gets to wait, and everyone gets called by the right name." People asked Jasmine why she never wrote a book, never ran for office, never accepted any awards. She just smiled. "Because I saw one child change how an entire town listens. And I think that's already big enough." Under the bed, where Zion's old wooden box once hid, there was now a new box. Not for storing unread letters, but for anyone passing through, anyone who had ever felt overlooked, to write down their name, clearly, fully, and have it kept. Not to archive, but to remind the world every person deserves to be known.